Did you know, in India, when temperatures go above 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, people start to die? In Britain, people start to die when temperatures go above 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And people living in London are the most at risk of dying through too much heat. Do you know what the trouble is? The number of UK homes overheating in summer quadrupled to 80% over the past decade, with the experts calling the situation a crisis. Heat already kills thousands of people each year in the UK, and the toll will rise as the climate crisis intensifies. Urgent action is needed both to inform people on how to cope with high temperatures and to adapt homes which are largely designed to keep heat in during the winter. On the face of it, it might seem that London wouldn't be too badly affected by climate change. It's heading for a Mediterranean climate by the year 2100. Well, there's lots of people who live in the Mediterranean areas, have a nice lifestyle. The trouble is, no part of Britain, no part of London is designed for a Mediterranean climate. Have a look at this house in Madrid. 30 odd years ago, I was working in Madrid. This is the house I stayed in. Look how it's designed for a Mediterranean climate. The whole of Spain is categorised as Mediterranean, even though Madrid is sort of inland and is quite high up. But for the scientists, Madrid has a Mediterranean climate. Look at how the house is designed. Look how small the windows are. They've got external shutters to keep the sun out. The upper floors are built out to shade the lower floors from the sun. You can tell it's London because I'm directly under a flight path for Heathrow. It's very busy. Each one of these houses cost £1 or £2 million. So the house in Madrid was designed for a Mediterranean climate. It even has a swimming pool. Compare that to houses in London. Look how large the windows are. Now, these windows have got blinds up, which is a good thing to keep the heat out, to keep the sun out. Although, since it's the end of May, and it's not particularly hot or sunny, I think these blinds are more about privacy than anything. But the trouble with houses in Britain is they've got big windows. They're designed for a cold climate to keep the heat in, to capture the winter sun. Britain has some of the oldest housing stock in Europe. It's badly insulated. It sort of sums up Britain's short-term approach to everything. On a hot day, compared with some Western European neighbours, such as Germany and Italy, UK homes are gaining heat more than twice as fast. The UK housing stock is the oldest in Europe, and British homes struggle to maintain desired temperatures in the cold and heat. The UK government has come up with a list of the types of home that are more likely to suffer from heat. If you live at the top of a block of flats, you'll suffer more from heat because heat rises and the sun will be shining just above your ceiling. Roofs can be up to 37 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding area if they have the sun shining on them all day. Also, if you live on the sunny side of a building, or if your windows have restricted openings, or a lot of windows in the UK don't open at all, if you can't open a window on each side of your building, so you can't have a through draft, if you don't have any natural shading, for example by trees, or, well, it says here the British government thinks if you've got very good insulation, it will trap the heat inside. But I can't help thinking, if you've got good insulation, even though outside might be very hot, then that insulation will help to keep you cool in the inside, you know, like living in a cave or something. It wouldn't cost that much to protect Britain's homes from the sun. It's been researched into. All you need to do is have external or internal blinds to keep the heat out. You improve your windows so you can have good ventilation. You can do things to your walls to reflect the heat. And also you can have different types of glass that reflect the sun's heat and stops it getting into the rooms. Whereas at the moment, the glass used in Britain is designed to reflect the heat back into the room. So there are things you can do. It's been looked into, and it would probably only cost about £40,000 per house. Well, if you think about that over a period of, say, 70 years, till we get to the year 2100, it is doable, isn't it? And if you do that, most homes in Britain would not need air conditioning, at least up to about 2 degrees Celsius of warming, which is about 2040. By the time you get to the year 2080 or 2100, just about every house in Britain will need air conditioning. But nobody wants you to have air conditioning because it uses a lot of energy and it generates heat. It might cool your house down, but until you absolutely need to have it, it's best to try and avoid it all the time. So what this means is that the houses of Britain are effectively greenhouses. Some homes are as much as 8 to 10 degrees Celsius hotter at night than the outdoor temperatures recorded at the local weather station. People described their homes feeling like a sauna, a greenhouse, a heat chamber and an oven. In 2019, the UK's Climate Change Committee warned that homes in the UK are not fit for the future, and that attempts to adapt housing stock for higher temperatures are falling farther behind the increase in risk from the changing climate. Our buildings aren't ready for climate change, but neither are we. Many heatwave deaths are due to heart attacks, strokes and respiratory and kidney problems exacerbated by high temperatures. British people are not familiar with heat and often don't see heat as a risk. Most consider it as something nice for socialising, going out, going to the beach. Staying inside, drinking less alcohol and not being on the beach can help with the extreme heat. There are suggestions for how people in Britain can change their work patterns to deal with the heat, and say when it goes above 25 degrees Celsius, the temperature at which people start dying in Britain, you can do simple things like relax dress codes at work, let people wear shorts to work. It might sound obvious, I think in Australia people wear shorts to work anyway if you're not in an air-conditioned office. But in Britain you can be quite sure every year in the summertime there'll be stories in the newspaper about schoolboys going to school wearing skirts, because teenagers in Britain have to go to school in long trousers. The girls are allowed to wear skirts, so the boys wear skirts as well, as sort of a protest. Also, allowing people at work to open their windows, allow them to bring fans in, provide cold drinks. All these things sound obvious. In Spain, the rules are the working environment must be between 17 and 27 degrees Celsius. People in Britain are thinking about what it will be like working when temperatures go above 25 degrees Celsius. If you're working outside, it's recommended to give people more control on the start and end times to avoid the hottest part of the day. Although how that will work for people travelling long distances to work in London and the expectation of being home in the evenings is not clear. The people most at risk from heat are the old, the young and the sick. The Greater London Authority, the authority responsible for London, has issued guidelines for old people's homes. They include things like draw curtains over windows to stop the sun getting in, open the windows at night to let the cold air in, switch off hot electrical devices so they don't generate heat. The number one thing you can do, which is most effective, is air conditioning. But they say it's very expensive, it's not really practical for lots of old people's homes. They do not want you to have air conditioning. The trouble is, even though £40,000 over say 50 or 60 years sounds a reasonable thing to do, people in Britain don't want to spend the money. For the last 20 years, the British economy hasn't really grown. We had the financial crisis, we had austerity, we had Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine, some other things as well. London is a very wealthy part of Britain. Britain's quite a wealthy country. People do not want are there any air conditioning vents up there? I don't know. I'll just stand here casually in case I'm videoing air conditioning vents. Getting people to upgrade their homes might be difficult, but even the standards for new homes are falling behind what's needed. Unused office blocks can be converted into flats with little or no planning permission and low insulation standards. Energy standards have even been lowered in the hope of boosting the building sector and the economy. Well, so far, everything we've covered is really about Britain. But London has a particular problem, which means people living in London have the highest risk of death from heat. And that's because it's an urban heat island. There are 8 million people living in it now, possibly heading for 10 million in another 10 years or so. It's always been warmer than the surrounding areas. You've got 8 million people living together, heating their homes, driving their cars, travelling in public transport. It's always 1 or 2 degrees warmer. But if you have a look at this diagram, you can see that heat islands are a particular problem in hot weather. The diagram shows two things. It shows air temperature as a dashed line, which is the temperature they give you on the weather reports, but it also shows the surface temperature as a solid line, and it shows it for daytime and for nighttime. And you can see, as you might expect, in the city centre it's warmer because you've got all these people living together. On the outskirts, where there's lots of green space, it's cooler because trees and plants have a cooling effect. They provide shade. This is Clapham Common I'm on now. They provide shade, but they also draw up quite a lot of water from the ground. They put it into the air in a process called transpiration. Has a great cooling effect. So green spaces in a heat wave in an urban heat island are a good thing. But have a look at the surface temperature of water. Surface temperature of water is the same in the daytime when the sun's shining on it, more or less, as is at night time when there's no sun, in case you don't know how nighttime works. And that's because water has a very high heat capacity. That means if you want to increase its temperature, you have to apply an awful lot of heat to it. And at night time, to reduce its temperature, it has to lose a lot of energy, a lot of heat energy. So water and green spaces in a city are good. But you can also see that the air temperature at night time are more or less the same as the temperatures during the daytime. The key thing about city centres is they're full of hard surfaces like tarmac and concrete that absorb the sun's heat in the daytime and release it back into the atmosphere at night, meaning temperatures never really fall that far. This is a problem in a heat wave because humans need to rest. They might be able to put up with the heat in the daytime, but they need to recover. If you have a look at this heat map of London, you can see where you live can have a big effect on temperatures. I'm in Clapham Common now. It's green. It's still under the flight path of the airplanes. It's much cooler, even though there's not a lot of trees here. Not by my standards anyway. There's not a lot of trees here, but it's enough to have a... Let me have a look. Clapham Common would be about 7 degrees cooler than Clapham itself, where I've just been walking through. So all those posh £1 million houses will suffer 7 degrees more warming than if you just came and sat in the park. It has been projected that average summer temperatures could increase in the southeast of England by 3.9 degrees Celsius by the 2080s. So Europe is heating up. During the 2003 summer heatwave, differences of up to 10 degrees Celsius between London and rural temperatures were measured. London's urban heat island effect will exacerbate the impacts of projected increased summer temperatures. Wherever you are live in London, by the year 2080, the chances are average temperatures will be 4 degrees Celsius warmer. The heat island effect during a heat wave will make nighttime temperatures 10 degrees warmer, 10 degrees Celsius warmer. Plus, because homes in Britain aren't well insulated, they're not designed for a Mediterranean climate, that could add another 10 degrees Celsius inside your house, because houses in Britain are like greenhouses. The other thing to notice about that diagram is for the nighttime temperatures, when the sun's gone in, it's a nice smooth curve. As you go into the city centre, it gets warmer. As you go to the rural areas, it gets cooler. For the daytime, look how jagged it is. Look how random it is. We're now into a world of microclimates. Do you live at the top of a block of flats on the sunny side of the building? How far are you from the park? Are you old or young? Do you work in an office or on a building site? One person's experience might be different to another's, even though they live on the same street. How old is your house? Old or new? Nobody in authority wants people in London or Europe to have air conditioning until absolutely necessary, because it uses so much energy, it warms the area, it can be polluting. They want you instead to improve your house, which sounds a reasonable thing to do, to resist the heat. That's not how the people of London are seeing this. In London, there are businesses that if you phone them up before 3 p.m. on one day, They will come and fit air conditioning to your house the next day. Also, prices only start at £2,200. Imagine that you can have a cool home without having to spend the £40,000 everyone knows you really ought to do to protect your home from the heat. It does seem like an excellent service, isn't it? I'm not selling air conditioning, but it does seem very tempting, doesn't it? Our core client at Core U is a London apartment resident or owner. We specialise in London apartments because they become very hot no matter the season. We know that now, don't we? And we know why. Due to the windows that don't open, concerns about noise or pollution, and increasing insulation demands, these apartments can become stuffy and overheated. That's something we didn't cover. If you live on a ground floor, then you won't want to sleep with your windows open at night time when the cool air can come in, because you'll be worried about crime. If you live on a busy road, people tend to keep their windows closed just because it's so noisy and because of the air pollution. However, many strict regulations apply to most London apartments. This often leads to a planning permission nightmare, especially since many air conditioning models do not comply with these rules. It's not just the people of London that are going down this route of cooling devices and fans. Using air conditioners and electric fans to stay cool accounts for nearly 20% of the total electricity used in buildings around the world today. Rising demand for space cooling is also putting enormous strain on electricity systems in many countries, as well as driving up emissions. The average efficiency of air conditioners sold today is less than half of what is typically available on the shelves, and 1/3 of the best technology available. You might think, well, the house you stayed in Madrid, Canada, everything, that didn't have air conditioning and you were okay because your house was designed properly. Oh no, we didn't have air conditioning, but it was hell. In a heat wave, actually every night in the summer, to be able to get to sleep, first of all you had a cool shower or you jumped in the swimming pool. Then you laid on your bed, and at the end of your bed you had a chair, and on the chair was a fan, and it blew on you all night. It was quite difficult getting to sleep. But since then, sometime in the last 30 years, someone has installed air conditioning, which is really where we're going to. But there's no point in fitting air conditioning unless you've already protected your house against the other impacts of heat. You know, good windows, external blinds. You can get roof tiles, which have a great effect in reducing your heat in the house. You couldn't really expect everyone in London to replace their roof tiles, but for new builds you could put them on. I think there are basically 3 types of air conditioning system. There's the one that's been installed in the house in Madrid, that's called a mini split system, where you have the main chilling unit outside the house, and then you pump the cold refrigerant into the house, and inside you have what's called an air handler unit that blows air across the cold refrigerant, cools the house down, or maybe just cools down the upstairs or just occasional bedrooms. And that's because you need to have what's called a safe haven, especially in cities where you have the heat island effect, where temperatures stay the same in day and night, and you never get a cool period to rest. You need that because humans suffer stress from the heat. They need to have a rest. If you can just cool 1 or 2 bedrooms down, that might be okay, might be enough just to keep you cool enough to have a healthy life. There are also air conditioners that you can fit in the window, and they blow the hot air out and bring in air which they cool down. And there are versions of those where you don't put them in the window, but you just cut 2 big holes in your bedroom wall. Those aren't very efficient. But there's a third kind now. Listen to this. Our internal Core U systems have no external box, and we design installations to be as unobtrusive as possible. This generally means that they do not require planning permission. We can complete the work in your apartment in just 1 day. Our systems are discreet and barely noticeable, allowing clients to bypass planning permission. We specialise in internal, water-cooled air conditioning systems designed specifically for London apartments. Instead of pumping hot air outside and bringing in cooler air, which can be cooled further, With water-cooled air conditioning systems, you take water from the tap, you plumb the air conditioning unit in, and use the cold tap water to cool the air. And when the tap water is warmed up, you flush it down the drain. It sounds a bit wasteful. One person online did the maths, and they thought a typical water-cooled air conditioning system could use 120 litres an hour. Well, a typical bath in Britain only needs 80 litres. That's equivalent of every hour you empty 1.5 baths down the drain. As we'll see in a future video, London not only is it suffering from heat, it's also running out of water. Without regulations, these things will carry on going on. And it's not just London where there's this increase in air conditioning. Between 2011 and 2022, the percentage of houses in Britain that had air conditioning went from 3% to 21%. So that's 1.8% of homes each year over a 10-year period had air conditioning installed in the UK. Each year in Britain, there are about 55,000 heat pump installations. There are 28.4 million homes. Yep. That works out each year 0.19% of homes have a heat pump installed. So air conditioners are being installed at a rate 10 times more than heat pumps are. You can't blame them though, can you? Because it's so easy to get air conditioning. Phone up, the next day it will be installed. People in Britain know climate change is happening. They can feel it. They're having air conditioning installed. But they'd much rather spend the money protecting themselves, much less concerned about reducing their own pollution by having a heat pump installed, which is I think is becoming more common around the world. People are doing less, or at least they're not increasing their attempts to have a survival future. They're just protecting themselves. London has the fastest increase in cooling demand in the world. A model to map energy demand down to street level shows cooling demand in the capital grew by 5% per year between 1980 and 2022 as summers heat up. Now, the official estimate for how many air conditioners there are in Britain is that there's 5% of homes have them, but this research says there's 20% of homes have them. 20% does sound quite high. Oh, I'm in the shade now. I have to go this way. That's better. But all these studies sort of validate each other. 5% increase in energy needed to run air conditioners each year in London. It all sort of maps out. Now, while I've been walking around, I've been trying to spot houses that have air conditioners installed. There are a couple of places I've seen. Obviously, commercial premises like restaurants, they've got loads of air conditioners. Because you need planning permission to have air conditioning installed, and there are companies that will install the mini split just as easily for you. They have a next day service. Because you're meant to have planning permission, and it can be difficult to get, it's much easier. Where's the sun now? This way. We'll go this way now. It's much easier just to have it installed and hope nobody notices. So it's difficult to see. I've seen some places. There's one place that seemed to have two vents next to each other, which I thought maybe that's like these ones you just fit to your bedroom wall. It reminds me a bit of that video I made about when will all the frogs die. This house seems to have a lot of vents. Are these air conditioning related? I have no idea. It reminds me a bit of that video I made about when will all the frogs die, when I walked around the woods looking for frogs and didn't find any. So I'm walking around London where, well, you'd think 20% of homes have air conditioning now. So in this road there must be dozens. If there are, I can't see them. Still, I trust the science. If the science tells me 20% of the homes have air conditioning in London or in Britain, I believe them. The researchers warned that continuation of this trend could put strain on the national electricity grid, increase carbon emissions and fuel social disadvantage amongst families unable to afford air conditioning. The trouble is, it's not either you protect your home against increasing heat in Britain or have air conditioning. You have to do both, because our houses are effectively greenhouses. No, you'd need your air conditioning system would have to work very hard and it'd be very wasteful. That's not what's happening. people are just going straight to air conditioning because it's easy, isn't it? By 2080 or 2100, every house in Britain will need air conditioning. It's far from clear, since the official figures for air conditioning in Britain is 5% of homes, it's far from clear the current electricity network will be able to cope. But even if it can normally cope, if you have a lot of air conditioning, it puts your electricity supply at risk during a heat wave, because the external electricity transmission cables that run across on the pylons, they're in the sun. There's a high demand for electricity to run everyone's air conditioning, so those cables heat up, they expand. That expansion increases the electrical resistance, which means they heat up further, which means they stretch further until they start touching things they're not meant to. Maybe other parts of the electrical network, maybe trees, cause them to short out. If you have electrical cables underground, they're still having a lot of electricity going through them all the time, powering people's air conditioning. It melts the insulation, causes it to short circuit when it touches the ground. Also, electrical substations, there's just so much electricity going through them all the time, they can't cope, they overheat. Now, in Britain, only 20% of our homes have air conditioners. In the United States, it's a much higher rate of air conditioning, it's a much warmer climate. And you can see in this diagram that as the years go by, as the summers become warmer, the number of electrical grid failures is going up. And it's not going up in a linear fashion, which is always a problem, because it's accelerating. Well, 3 years ago, I stood on the banks of the Thames opposite Tilbury Container Port, and I read out the latest science from the United Nations about how climate change is going to progress. Here's what they said based on the scientific theory. At this level of warming, cities also become badly affected. European cities are hotspots for multiple risks of increasing temperatures and extreme heat, floods and droughts. Warming beyond 2 degrees Celsius of global warming is projected to result in widespread impacts on infrastructure and businesses. These include increased risks for energy supply and transport infrastructure, increases in air conditioning needs, and high water demand. What the scientists predicted 3 years ago seems to have started. If people don't have the money to improve their houses now, well, in the future it's going to get worse. London faces a near £2 billion hit to its economy if climate change causes temperatures to soar by 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. As climate change progresses, the economic impacts will start to take their toll, and it will become more difficult to tackle these things. What this all boils down to is people in Britain don't realise we're heading for terrible heat, and if they did, they wouldn't know what to do about it. Well, the British government is quite happy to help people buy heat pumps or solar panels. It seems to me they ought to do something similar for air conditioning. If you want to have solar panels or a heat pump and have help from the government, you need to have an energy report done on your house, and your house needs to have reasonable levels of insulation. You could do something like that with air conditioning as well, couldn't you? And regulate these new types of air conditioners that are very wasteful of water. But you might think, well, maybe Britain, not used to the heat, is going to struggle a bit. But people in Spain, where they're used to hot weather, are suffering just as much. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. Your world is not designed for the climate we have now, and it's certainly not designed for the climate we're heading towards. In Spain now, in parts of Spain, in the heat waves, it's so hot. There are stories of entire classes of children all suffering from nosebleeds. All the kids in my class have had a nosebleed except me. It's really, really hot, said one of the students at a school in Seville, who had to endure the recent sweltering 34 degrees Celsius temperatures inside a classroom with no air conditioning. For the moment, 800 or 900 air conditioners have been distributed among schools in the Balearic Islands. We know it's not the solution, but in the short term, we have to mitigate the situation as much as we can. There are protocols in place for dealing with high temperatures. These range from promoting natural ventilation and hydration for students and teachers to making the timetable more flexible, avoiding physical activities in the middle of the day and eating light meals. It sounds very similar to what's happening in London, doesn't it? You know, don't have air conditioning, do these other things instead, have ventilation, drink plenty of water. If it's so hot the entire classrooms of children are getting nosebleeds, you really are going to have to do something quite significant to the schools to make them resilient to heat if you're not going to install air conditioning. And even the authorities say air conditioners are not the solution, it's just a short-term gap. It seems to me air conditioning is going to be needed in Spain and the whole of Spain. Students in Sevilla, Cordoba, Jaén and Huelva are suffering from fainting spells and nosebleeds as a result of the poorly ventilated classrooms. Last week 3 students collapsed and 1 teacher was sent to hospital because of the heat. Parents in Andalusia demanded urgent action to stop the constant fainting spells. In some ways, Spain is already at a place where London could be heading to in the future. In Spain, the working environment is meant to be between 17 and 27 degrees Celsius. Most schools are unable to keep to that, and in fact 70% of schools in Spain do not have air conditioning. This video has just been about the impacts of heat on London. I'm going to do some other London ones. It doesn't include things like impacts of food supply being more difficult, or the cascading, compounding impacts as other parts of the world who suffer the impacts of climate change much worse affect London, because it's a very international city. It's just about the heat, and I'll turn this way for the sun. It's just about the heat, and it's a whole area that no one really seems to know anything about. So thank you for watching. That's the end of the video, by the way, and leave a comment if you want to. Apart from that, thank you and goodbye. Goodbye.